Are you sick of scrolling through Netflix and Hulu searching for movies that are high quality and family friendly? Christian Cinema has thousands of movies available on demand that you can watch anytime, anywhere. When you sign up for a giving membership, a premium offering from Christian Cinema, you can watch 5 free movies every month. Learn more about becoming a giving member at givingcompany.com/giving membership and start watching great movies today. The other side of the road is safe, where we sidestep being bothered and avoid getting involved. But rolling up your sleeves and boldly going where few dare to tread, that's walking through Samaria. Each week on our podcast, we introduce you to the special few who walk in the spirit of the Good Samaritan. On behalf of the Giving Company and your hosts, David Hendrickson and Dan Riveros, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Walking Through Samaria podcast. I'm your host, Dan Riveros, with my co-host,
David Hendrickson.
David Hendrickson, man, you're living that lake life right now, right?
Dan, we are on Zoom again.
Nice.
We just can't seem to shake the remote podcast scenario.
I love it.
COVID cases are on the rise. What are we going to do?
Oh no, don't say that. No.
I know.
We got a special guest today, man. Who do we got?
We do. Colleen Swindoll Thompson is here on the Walking Through Samaria podcast. Colleen, welcome.
Colleen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great to meet with you guys.
Our listeners probably know Colleen. They certainly know Swindoll, I guess is the right pronunciation, right, Colleen? So
it is. I noticed you kind of said Swindler. And
I know. I got to get it right. I got to get it right. I rushed to Thompson, and I got to remember, the accent on the second syllable there. So
that's all right.
It's so great. Colleen, you're in Texas right now. If you don't mind, I'm going to read your bio, and it's going to get our listeners super excited. And then we have much to talk about because you have had quite the journey. And
quite the journey. Yes.
You are going to bless our listeners for sure. So to everybody out there, Colleen Swindoll Thompson has spent most of her life living in the states of California and Texas. In 1993, she graduated with a degree in communications and a double minor in education and psychology. Her husband is her hero, and combined they have 5 witty, creative, young adult children. She treasures time with her family, reading on quiet afternoons, and when her body lets her after back surgery, fulfilling her never-ending wish to win the Yard of the Month contest through gardening. Her experience as a caregiver, ongoing physical pain, education in psychology, and certification as a life coach have given her an unwavering passion to encourage and equip caregivers and their families with truths and tools to help them live well, regardless of life's ever-changing circumstances. Colleen founded Reframing Ministries to provide for caregivers and those living with significant challenges. As a ministry, Reframing embraces those who suffer. They understand that life is messy and painful, and also know without healthy support, surviving well is impossible. Reframing Ministries offers help and hope through books, written articles, inspiring interviews, on-life support groups, personal emails, podcasts, and a collective network of authentic world influencers. Colleen has written Reframing Life, focusing on God when life gets sideways and when life isn't fair, what they didn't tell us in Sunday school. Colleen, it is just a treat to have you on the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Ooh, welcome,
Thank
Colleen.
you. Well, thank you. It's such a treat to be with you guys.
All right, so let's start with the pronunciation of Swindoll, if you don't mind, Colleen. You've got to tell us. I would assume the California part was growing up part of the Chuck Swindoll kind of ministry movement. Can you tell us what life was like? Set the stage for us a little bit. Colleen is a little girl growing up in California.
Well, what a lot of people don't really know is that for a lot of the years in California, when I was 4 when we moved there. So from age 4, we lived there 23 years. For many years, my dad was the pastor of a local church, like many pastors are. And we had one car and a picnic table that was unfinished. So we got splinters in our butts because it wasn't finished. I mean, it was the real deal. 4 kids, and my folks put us through private schools, and it was very unlike probably what a lot of people would imagine, because there's that idea that someone well-known like my dad, who's been an amazing influencer for so many people for over the years and leaving a legacy that I so greatly respect. But it wasn't just this glorified existence. It was day-to-day life. And my two brothers and sister had very typical, I would say, childhoods in that there were struggles, there were challenges, there were family dysfunctions that we've had to work through since then. So thankfully, I was given the permission to just be who I am. And that freedom, I think, allowed me, when I was challenged in my faith, to really examine it and embrace it years later. Yeah. Had I been forced into a funnel, like a lot of pastors tend to do with their kids, because their identity is wrapped up in how does my kid make me look, rather than what has God called me to do? And in raising these kids, how can I honor him with what he's entrusted me to? So that's good. I'm very thankful, or I would have probably greatly rebelled, because I'm very strong-willed.
Well, that'll be fun to talk about. I'm just curious, was there a sense when you were young, like, hey, the ministry is really taking off, like it is reaching millions of people around the world? Did you sense that as a child? Could you sort of experience that?
I couldn't. And here's the reason why. My dad, in his own history, had so many challenges that I would find, years ago. In fact, we just got back from NRB, which is National Religious Broadcasters. I was talking with my friend Priscilla Shire, Tony Evans' daughter. Yeah. And we both just said, it's amazing to see where things are now versus where they were when our dads were part of National Religious Broadcasters, and they still are, but very much a part of that evolving ministry online, and it started through radio. So I didn't really realize that, because I would find these awards that my dad won in the bottom drawer of his desk. And I'm like, Dad, what? This is a gold medallion award, Dad. What is this? And he's like, it's nothing. I'm like, Dad, I'm so irritated with you right now. Because I wanted to celebrate him, and how often it is that when we have histories that can be very shame-based, or whatever they are, where we don't feel full enough, then those things don't take precedence. And I'm very thankful that was the case, because had it been, this is a ministry and you have to look a certain way, that would not have worked well with me. So it's very real. That's really great to hear, right? Very authentic, very refreshing. That's just great to hear. I just keep wanting to tell him, can you take at least one award out? Because I'd like to celebrate you. Well, one of the things that I'm sure our listeners are picking up on, and as we got to know you, Colleen, recently, I was, surprised, just blown away at the diversity and extent of experiences that you have had in your life. And I love some of the phraseology from your books: when life gets sideways, when life isn't fair. And I just want to compliment you for a second, because a lot of us have experienced trauma at some point in our life. I did as a child, and I'm just not comfortable kind of telling my story, right? Like it just isn't part of my walk. And I think when people hear the reality of your journey, it's just encouraging, and it puts our faith, I think, in the right limelight, the right vein. And I think you're going to be able to encourage, our listeners how you get to the other side. So if you don't mind, we're going to dive right in to some of these experiences that you have had. So to our audience, buckle up, because this is going to get wild. This is going to get crazy, but you're going to be encouraged and impressed, and I think, motivated and maybe soothed and comforted by Colleen's experiences and where she is today. So Colleen, with all of that babble, let's start with marriage, if you don't mind, with your permission.
Your first marriage was an example of when life isn't fair, when life gets sideways. You talk about your husband being your hero, but it's your current husband. Can you, as best you can, kind of tell our listeners about that experience for you?
Sure. So one of the things that I love that you said was that it's uncomfortable to talk about your story or the hard parts of your story. I think that's universal. I think it's universal that we don't like to go back and revisit those places because they're so shame-based. I'm right now reading The Soul of Shame by Kurt Thompson, learning so much about how shame disintegrates our minds. It pulls us apart, and God calls us to be integrated. And so my hope through everything said and done is to help people integrate their stories with how does this match God's work in our lives. So yes, I as a child experienced challenges. I love Paul saying that he had a thorn in the flesh. He never described what that was because most of us would say, well, I don't have that, so it must not be. Well, it's not that specific. It's that God allows something that keeps us on our knees. And from childhood, I experienced challenges and abuses that don't need to be defined, but that led me to find a partner who was abusive emotionally, spiritually, to my children physically. And that I didn't know what I didn't know until I got into therapy, and I dove into that because I knew I can't do this on my own. And if you're listening right now and you're in that place, there is wisdom in a multitude of counselors. My desire, even though God moved us to a place that I did not want to move, one of my children said, I think the Lord moved us here, Mom, for you to get healthy.
Oh, wow.
Years later. And I love that because that's exactly what happened. And so, yes, I went through a really, really challenging divorce. It was very public, of course. And so I don't need to go back to all the details. All that to say, I understand anyone who's gone through a divorce. You feel like an outsider. The first Sunday back in Texas, I sat in the very back row of the church that we had founded. I founded with my dad years earlier because I felt ashamed and I felt very odd, I will say. Coming out of that, though, I just said, my daughter at the time was suicidal. She was self-harming. I have permission from my kids to speak openly about that. My youngest son with a multitude of disabilities had regressed greatly. So we were we were suffering on a lot of levels, not just loneliness, but recovering from abuse. How do we set our mindset on the Lord? What does it mean when Romans says God works all things together for good when we've prayed for something for so long? And it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And that really was the experience that we had. Yet, moving forward, I decided I'm going to help my kids get healthy as much as I can. Got them involved in therapy and counseling and mentor relationships that were safe and trustable. And then my daughter just said, Mom, I just think you need to have, a partner and think about marrying again. I said, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. She's like, well, that's fine.
I'm not going through that again.
Yeah. It was like a no, never.
That's funny.
To the core, that's really where I was. And met a gentleman who connected with me, and his daughter had health issues. His son had health issues that were similar to what my kids had struggled through. And so we talked medical stuff, and and I was listened to, and I was affirmed and trusted and told you have a voice. One of the things that abuse does is it takes away a person's voice. So I think it's vital for us to look beyond just the abuse, but to look at what it does in our souls. And for anyone who feels like their voice doesn't matter, that's a lie, because it does matter. And growing that voice is essential to what God has for every person that he's called. And all of us who know Jesus, he says, I've given gifts, a multitude of different gifts for every person. As we know him, he wants to use those gifts. Yeah. So back to the gentleman that I'm married to today, he literally stepped into my life, became my friend. Before I even thought about marrying him, he was ahead of the game. He says he knew that he wanted to marry me within a few months. I'm like, I didn't think that. So, which he reminds me of all the time. But the thing that I said never to was the very thing that has brought amazing healing. I didn't know that a relationship could be so intimately rewarding. And that's intimacy on a level, not just sexual intimacy as in to know one's soul.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy because, there are times where it's very hard and we struggle. 5 kids that are adults, one with massive disabilities. He adopted John in 2017.
Wow.
Which shows you just the kind of man that he is. So neither of us are perfect. We're far from that. But we are rowing the boat in the same direction together. A lot of times it's uptide, but we stay in it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How I'm going to give a little bit of background to this. I have a good friend in Atlanta. He has lost 2 grandchildren, and we were at a father-son retreat, and I remember him kind of pouring out a little bit to the group of fathers that were all gathered around. He had brought his oldest son, I think, to that retreat, and he kind of did when is this going to end? When is this going to be over? Can you talk about how did you stay moving forward? Because just to make it explicit, abusive relationship was the description of your marriage, the experience of your marriage, and then severe special needs son. Was there a point where you were like, hey, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. Or were you always kind of moving forward? Because it just seems those are 2 really significant things that were happening to you at the same time. And yet you seem to have kept going in the right direction.
That's a really good question, because I think the Christian culture gives us the message, whether it's implicit or explicit, that those who move forward and seem to be unhindered by challenges are always on top of things. And that's not my experience. When I get hit with something really hard, I get knocked down and incredibly discouraged. The book that I love, this book, The Obstacle is the Way. It's not a Christian book per se, written by Ryan Holiday, but he talks about the obstacles and he talks about moving forward. And sometimes he says, sometimes we're chasing the dragons. We think we can change, but are not for us to change. And that relates to when we're knocked down, we have this desire to overcome and to succeed. Well, sometimes it's in not succeeding that we hear God the most. When we are the Beatitudes, when we are mourning, when we are in sorrow, there is a very holy place that grief holds in all of our lives. In fact, I did a study on tears. My executive assistant, who's amazing, said, you've got to look at the different kinds of tears that we have. And a scientist had studied various tears. Happy tears, like when we laugh, look different under a microscope than tears when we cry, or tears when we say goodbye to someone. What's interesting is tears shed in grief release a pain. They're pain relieving tears. So a chemical in our body is released as we grieve. And I think there's a very holy place in grieving. Before Gethsemane, that's exactly what Jesus was doing, grieving for probably a lot of things we don't even know. I would think he came here to save and was rejected. He came here to comfort and was pushed away. So he gets where you and I are today. So yeah, there were times where my faith was, I questioned it on every level. And I love Thomas, the disciples. I love all the disciples because they're such a ragtag team of people and would never probably be hired in the church today. But he says, until I see the scars in Jesus, because the others had seen Jesus, but he hadn't. It's like, until I see this, I cannot believe. And that's where we get sometimes, Jesus, I need to see something to press on. And that may be a walk outside to look at plants that are growing in the middle of a non-growing season.
Yeah.
It could be a child healing. Jonathan fell out of his crib when he was 2. For a bone to heal is the reversal of our body's natural state, which is a state of falling apart. So many areas that we can see Jesus in the little places. So yeah, there have been times where I've just had to just say, God, I need to see you in some way. And it can be big or small. Usually it's not the lightning bolts that come out from somewhere.
Sure.
It's the rock or the little stone in the water that has been made smooth after years and years of refinement from the water. So yes, I have challenged the Lord and been challenged to keep believing at times, and still do. Just had a setback a couple of weeks ago. I thought, are you kidding me, Lord? Like that just undid 6 months of work. And so I had to cry and grieve and say, I don't get this. Another thing that in the book, The Obstacle is the Way, he talks about getting stuck on the why. We often look at the why. If I just knew why.
Yeah.
What is why going to change about it?
Right.
Why doesn't change anything? It didn't change Job's situation, didn't change Joseph's situation, didn't change David's situation, didn't change Esther's situation. It's accepting that what God has allowed, I may never understand, I may never like, but I will release my will in surrender to a greater purpose that I may not see on the side of heaven, but I know that his love never fails. Psalm 118. He is forever loving us.
Yeah.
And I have to cling to that. It's a long answer to a short question.
No, it's really good. Really, really good. So I'm just processing your powerful words here, but marriage, children, it doesn't stop there for you. So before we got on, you were actually talking about a medical condition that you had or have that was added into this blender as well. Was kind of your own medical scenarios. And again, forgive me, I don't know how much you can disclose or want to disclose, but it just doesn't stop with those 2 major categories, those 2 major experiences. You add on more. What does that look like?
I'm a genetic nightmare because I've learned a lot about genetics, even though I know Psalm 139, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And sometimes I'm like, Lord, I think you made me the trash can of that genetically. But up until age 40, I would run every day. That was my outlet because I have ADD, kept me, and I just loved it. Then within a few weeks, wasn't able to walk because of back pain, had no idea what was going on, had been in car accidents and cracked my neck, didn't know that at the time, busted my face up, got that repaired. So when I got to the place where I couldn't walk, I was like, wow, this is really a problem. So 2015 had my first back surgery, which was horrific. Again, my husband, my hero, sat by me when I couldn't move, carried me to the bathroom. That's when you really know intimacy is true, for sure. But along with Jonathan's testing of all of his disabilities, we did other testing to help figure out what was involved with his disabilities, my youngest son.
Yeah.
And I did testing as well and realized I have a lot of genetic mutations that have caused spinal deformities. It's caused neurological challenges. It causes skin challenges. It causes hearing compromise in some ways. I mean, there's just a ton of different things that I think any person who functions optimally is a miracle.
Yeah.
Because we all have stuff. And for me, the physical challenges continue. I have 2 more surgeries coming up that I didn't know about 3 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
But because of pain reminding me that I'm human, which I'm going to refer to a book that's one of my favorite ones, The Gift of Pain, written by Philip Yancey and 2 other guys. I can't remember their names right now, but he talks about in the introduction, they studied leprosy in 3 different countries. Paul Brand is the other one. And realized that leprosy was a nerve communication disorder, not just a skin disorder.
Wow.
It's fascinating. And he starts the book off with the illustration of a disability called congenital indifference to pain. And in that, the mother is taking care of her daughter, who's in a playpen and completely safe. The mom goes to answer a telephone call, comes back in, and the daughter is making little swirly signs, which looks like finger paint on the playpen. And she looks down, and her daughter had bitten off the tip of her finger.
Oh my God.
And it was blood.
Oh.
And by the time the daughter was 5, she'd bitten off all of her fingers. There hasn't been, at the time of the book's writing, someone with that disorder lived past 19 years of age. Because pain awakens us to something being wrong. And with leprosy, the nerve disorder is the signals to the brain. Don't tell the brain, you need to move your arm because it's over a fire.
Okay.
You need to change your gait and how you walk because the blisters are forming. So it revolutionized, honestly, my view of pain. Not that I don't like it. I don't prefer it or want to pray for it, just like I don't want to pray for patients because I'm not patient. Yet we have to look at it as it's said in their book, the fire alarm. If I'm in a fire, I want my alarm to go off. So pain is God's calling. We know that C.S. Lewis says it's his megaphone. It is, in my world, the constant reminder that I'm not in charge, that God is bigger, that I must surrender. And over time, if I don't get in the way, he will work it all out. But I have to let go of trying to fix it in my time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Very
well, unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. So
no, it stinks, huh?
So we're going to keep rolling, and our listeners are probably like, "What in the world is next?" But this is one that kind of breaks my heart for the kingdom. Dan, you may remember when we had Shanti Feldhahn on the podcast just, a couple weeks ago. Her episode released, Colleen, and you and she share a common experience, which is betrayal from your supposed Christian friends. And, you know, that's the one that, you know, is like, wow, of all the things, there were a number of things that you experienced that were, you know, completely out of your control, genetic, like you said. This is one where it's Christians behaving badly. And, you know, unfortunately, it seems to be a part of our world today. You can see it on Twitter, you know, you can see it on Facebook, you can see it in churches, you know, wherever. Tell us, if you don't mind, sorry to hit yet another topic for you, but how did that feel with everything that you were experiencing to add, you know, kind of betrayal by those close to you at the same time? How did that manifest itself? And again, what was your reaction? How did you see your way through it? Well,
I didn't at first. I was completely blindsided. Now here, years later, the perspective has shifted because I'm sure, not knowing the full story, which we never know the full story of anybody's lives.
Yep.
So lots of assumptions can be made. I've made assumptions in the past of others that were so wrong or incorrect. So that's humbling. And I have gone to the Lord and said, forgive me for that assumption. I'm so sorry. How many times did Jesus experience that, first of all?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
And I think there's an expectation level that we have people that are, in the church. There's our expectation on others, which, again, that's not our job, but we do that, is they're supposed to be my friend forever and, safe and all that. And so when we're betrayed, there's incredible deep pain and deep wounding. I don't think it's any different. In fact, I have in this book was one of the most transformative in healing some of the betrayals, called A Tale of Three Kings, A Study in Brokenness by Gene Edwards. And he talks about how God allows and uses people in powerful positions like Saul, who was called by God, was a powerful king, but he was mad. He was insane. And yet he was used by God.
Yeah, right.
And he hunted David for his life. And I understand stalking because that's been one of my experiences. It's terrifying. It's also helpful to know that there's transformation that can happen. In fact, this chapter is called Caves. He actually says, caves are not the ideal place for morale building. There's a certain sameness to them all. They are dark, they are wet, they are cold, they are still. A cave becomes even worse when you are its sole inhabitant, and the distance you can hear the dogs crying. But sometimes when dogs are crying and the hunters are not near, the prey may sing. And he goes on to say, everything in the cave that David was in was being crushed out of him. I think if we cling to the fact that, yes, betrayal feels like and is the experience of being in a cave where we are alone and it's damp and the sun is not out. But in those cave places, our sole survivor with us is Jesus.
Yeah.
He's the only one. There is no other person to cling to. He's also the creator of the universe. He's also sovereign over all things and knows exactly why you're there and how long you'll be there. And at times I would just bawl or kick and scream or say, this isn't fair. It's not fair.
Yeah.
Nothing in Jesus' life was fair. So for those who may find themselves in that cave, I say, cry out to the Lord. David could have killed Saul at one point, but he didn't.
That's right.
So it's to keep our focus on how am I to be obedient? What is being crushed out of me? This iron that's being refined by fire. The dross has to be released from the purity of the silver. My dad worked in a machine shop for several years and years ago, before he ever was going to be a pastor. Yeah. He said that they heated the metal up so hot that it would pull up the impurities, and then he'd sweep off what was called a slag. And that had to come out for the metal to be pure. Right. So looking back and continuing to look forward, I say, Lord, today, if I'm in this cave experience, may not be from a betrayal, maybe from a disappointment, something I wish was different. Yeah. What are you doing in me, Lord, that needs attention? I can't change my external circumstances, but I know you're changing me. And I know you're doing it out of love. That's just a choice in my head that I must believe. Wow. And when I do, he shows up.
One of the things that I was struck by in getting to know your story through conversations with you, but as well as, doing some research on you,
Uh-oh.
Yeah, the stalking, all that. The timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm asking our listeners to lean in here. I think so often in the path, the journey, the walk of a believer, it's like, God, you got to fix this now.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about your time frame of experiencing trauma, let's call it trauma, let's call it what it is.
It is.
There was no, God, I want to wake up tomorrow and have this be gone. It was lengthy. And so when I think about your story, it is number and diversity of trials. It is the source of those trials, because some of those were very close relationships, husband, friends, as we've talked about. But then I think about the timeline, and how is there some encouragement for our listeners, which is, hey, we all want to say, get me out of the lion's den now, like get me out of this. But there's something to the timeline that's God's timing, not ours. And how did you think about that in your soul and in your mind as you were dealing with numerous, one after the other, cases of trauma and trial?
Well, I think it continues. There are.
Yeah, it's not over, right?
Challenges.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So first of all, there's a preconceived idea that if I trust Jesus, then my trials will come and go. Well, that may be the case, and that's wonderful if it is. But there's also those that feel the pressure or the weight, and it doesn't seem to let up.
Yeah.
So what do we do in that situation? That's really how reframing was birthed, was this pressure is not letting up. How do I move forward? So I had to really look at, what does God say about time? Is it chronological, as I mentioned in the devotion that we shared the other day? Or is it kairos, which is God's time? Isaiah tells us, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. As far as the east is from the west, so are my thoughts from your thoughts and my ways from your ways. We have to go back to the truth, or else we don't have anything to stand on. And then it's angering. Like, give me a break, Lord. So it's reframing. How do we look at time? It's not chronologically as we celebrate birthdays. In fact, in my life, celebrating a birthday for John is not always a joyful occasion. It's painful. Yeah. He's further and further removed from the son that my other son, who went from 24 to 25 to 26. He'll never be there unless the Lord changes that trajectory. Right. So I have to look at it in a different perspective. In fact, one book that I read, I don't recall the name of it, but he says in the book, does the little tiny minnow in his creek understand the power of the moon and how all of the galaxy that God controls is put together? No. The minnow understands that he's in his little creek and the water's provided and his food is provided, but he can't understand the oceans. He cannot understand the seas and the ways of gravitational forces or global warming, if that's going on, or not global warming. Be that as it may, we're in our creek. Each of us are little minnows, and we have a purpose, and God provides sustenance in that spot. And he takes care of what's up the river and what's down the river. Living in today means staying in the space that he's put us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in time, it's easy for us to live in reverse or to live in the future. And a lot of that time is wasted time. What are we missing in the present? So yeah, there are times where I think, Lord, this is tough. And we go to our counselor and he's like, you guys are in the middle of another hurricane, which it feels like that often. There are days where, thankfully, I don't have the opportunity to stay in bed because of John's needs, but I want to just pull away. And part of Reframing's ministry is caring for caregivers who don't get the chance to pull away.
It's good.
Who need to have someone say, I get it. You didn't sleep for 6 or 7 years. You don't ever get to go to bed without making sure, did the medications go down right? Are they going to work? Was this behavior issue. What do I do now that they're out of school and I have no one to care for my child? So many pressures.
Yeah.
Yet that we're not given a life of free of pressure. We're given a Savior who promises to help carry us through and walk with us through that pressure.
Yeah, that's good. So as we wind down, Colleen, there's one question that I feel like you could give our listeners a bit of advice, which is, as you look back on your experiences over the course of many years, you endured hardships, like you mentioned, and there's still some today. How do you think about relationships, human relationships? How has your perspective on what types of relationships, the criticality of those relationships, et cetera? Give us a bit of Colleen Swindoll Thompson's wisdom on, I got to imagine your perspective has changed on relationships because of your experiences.
Most definitely. I think I want to answer this well. For years after going through betrayal and misunderstanding, I haven't had that Joseph experience where the brothers come back and say, oh, we're so sorry. And if I waited for that, then I'm looking for something to satisfy what I want rather than what God's plan is. So I've given that to the Lord. Whether or not there's anything that comes back around, that's the Lord's work. That's not my work. For years, I did protect my heart and did not let anybody in, so I didn't want to remarry. Yet we're created for relationships.
Yeah.
God's reason for creating man was to be in relationship and to have joy in that relationship with him. So sin and shame separate us, whatever the cause may be, betrayal, abuse, trials of any kind. It's easy to shut down and say, and make a vow, I'll never be hurt again.
Yeah, never again. Yep.
Yeah. So I would love to say that would work. It doesn't, because that closes off the Lord's working in our lives. So there's an interesting study neurologically, thankfully we can do this now, on how we react visually and neurologically when we're in person. So we've come through a year of social distancing.
Yes.
Even my son, Jonathan, with all of his challenges, says, Mom, I'm so lonely. We need each other, because chemicals are released when we are visually and in person present with another person. God's made us in such incredible ways. Through a camera, thankfully, we have cameras, we have media, we have ways to connect, which has been a survival mechanism. But the original creation is for us to be close to others and for them to be close to us. So let's get wise about that. Let's read on what makes safe relationships. Am I a safe person? Let's begin there.
Yeah. That's it, right?
Am I one
that question? Yeah.
Exactly. Am I one that, through the gossip chain talks about prayer requests when it's really gossip, or talks about all my worries when that becomes an addiction, rather than, when are you going to give that up to the Lord and trust him with that? Yeah. So let's start with, how safe am I? What does safety look like? There are several books. Cloud and Townsend are fabulous at boundaries. And there's a great book called, it's not The Hiding Place, that's Corey Ten Boom, but it was another book by John about a girl who's hiding and afraid of relationship, and how when we hide, then we cut off an avenue of really a life source, which is relationship with Jesus. So am I the healthiest that I can be? How can I continue to grow and be healthier? That takes humility. That takes a desire to step into another's world. How is the judgment? How judgmental am I? Yeah. Having a son with disabilities really takes that away. It shows you how judgmental you are. Yeah. And then it's saying, Lord, continue to create in me a clean and pure heart, like David prays. Create in me a clean heart, oh God. so that we may
That's it.
serve him well. And the relationships he brings to us, he's entrusting that person. Am I honoring that? If it's not a safe person, it's time, as Henry Cloud writes in Necessary Endings, sometimes you have to say, this isn't a good relationship. It's really not healthy.
Yeah.
And it's not promoting growth or feeding my soul. So there's a lot that goes into relationships, but they are vital and they are necessary and they open us up to Jesus.
That's awesome. Well, you have sure collected a lot of wisdom in your time. And I don't know how you process all that, like, hey, did I have to experience all of this to acquire this level of wisdom and ability to encourage people and help people? If you don't mind, Colleen, as we wind down, can you tell people how to learn more about Reframing Ministries, maybe how to follow you or get connected with you online? I'm sure many of our listeners are like, wow, I've got to learn more here.
All the socials,
Sure.
Instagram, TikToks, Twitter, all of it.
Yeah, throw it all out there.
So my executive assistant and my media team, they are so profoundly know all of the media stuff. I'm too old for that. But on, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, we have a John's Jams, which is my son's music list.
That's cool.
I don't even know all of them, but it's Reframing Ministries. You can connect through reframingministries.com.
Okay.
Write to me personally through Reframing Ministries at insight.org. I respond to those personally because I care and I want people to know they don't have to walk alone. So there's a private caregiver Facebook group, which is an amazing place. And it's not just for caregivers. It's for people who are suffering and just need to be heard. I need to say, I don't know what to do here. And that's on Facebook through our private Facebook group. Go to Reframing Ministries on Facebook, and then you'll see the tab for the private group. So that's how they can connect through Instagram, through all of them. We can put them online. I'm looking at my assistant going, can you help me?
We'll send it out with the post for sure. All of those links. That's really fantastic. So last question, Colleen, you've been very generous with your time and with your wisdom. This is a podcast that Dan and I put together to really highlight stories of good Samaritans in adherence to the parable in Luke chapter 10, like the reality of that parable, not the way it's been maybe massaged or modified over the years in secular society. And when I think of that story, first of all, you have the Jewish person who experienced trauma, right? Beaten and robbed, left for dead. You have betrayal. You have the priest and the Levite who walked on by, like a Dionne Warwick song, walk on by and didn't pay attention, didn't heed. And you had the Samaritan who's kind of the hero of the story and goes above and beyond to care for the person. I want our listeners, we were challenged by one of our guests many, many weeks ago on how evangelicals, how Christians should be behaving and how we should be leading in the areas of compassion. I asked you just last week, how do I make sure I don't become a toxic husband, right? How do we stay on course or, not get veered off the path and become toxic to people that are close to us? Can you leave us with a final word of advice or direction even, like do this to be good Samaritans in relationships, to not be toxic people, and more importantly, to not walk by people who have experienced trauma, because Christians need to be leaning in and getting their hands dirty when our brothers and sisters experience trauma, because it is a reality of life and someday it's going to be us.
It will. And so my question is, first of all, how judgmental are you?
Yeah.
When someone is struggling, do you assume to know what they're going through? Do you assume to know what they should do? That's putting on the God hat. And none of us know. Yeah. God does.
Yeah.
So first of all, let's take off that hat and let's be human and reconnect with, I really screw up too. I'm not always put together too.
Yep.
What would I do in that position? I think experience is one of the most brilliant educators, although people won't experience having a child with disabilities or a daughter who is suicidal. We all have something that can ground us. So first of all, it's ask the Lord, show me where my heart is judgmental and needs to be humbled.
Good.
And prune. John 10, John 15, he talks about being pruned.
Yeah.
Ask the Lord, cut back those areas that are unhealthy. The next I would say is to the level that you've accepted your own trials is a level that you can accept trials with others. Not that we resolve them, but we have space or capacity to embrace others when we have come to terms and accepted God's trying of us. Empathy has been shown, I read this the other day, to be the most impactful comforter when someone is suffering.
Wow. Not
sympathy or pity, but empathy, which says, I'm putting myself in your shoes. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Can someone do that? And finally, if you were to ask someone to wash another's feet, that's my litmus test. Just yesterday, I sat on my patio with John. He put his legs up we were sitting on a little outside couch, and I just rubbed his feet because every nerve in our body is connected to our feet somewhere and connects to our organs in every way.
Wow.
It's an honor to rub his feet and to be in that place of, God, you massage my soul. So Jesus, before he died, that was his behavior with his disciples.
Yeah.
Are you willing to do that without saying, well, what are they going to do with this? So many times people say, I'm not going to give any money to that person. They'll just go buy alcohol. What if that little bit of money is a gift from the Lord that turns their heart around?
Yeah.
We don't know. So can you sit and wash someone's feet or just be with them and not wonder what God's going to do with that? That's where knowing Jesus and walking with him, being that Samaritan. The Samaritan didn't know what he'd do if he put the guy in a hotel. He didn't say, well, I'm going to put you in the hotel if tomorrow you'll go and do this, and this.
Right.
He cared for the need. He cared for the needed hand and allowed God to change everything else.
Yeah.
That's all I got for y'all.
That is
so awesome.
Outstanding, Colleen. Wow, what a treat it has been to hear from you. Reframingministries.com.
You got it.
Is that right? So I know our listeners are going to be pinging you and that site, and you're going to be hearing from them. But Colleen, I don't know how to, like you said, that, you got to take off the God hat because you just don't know what other people are experiencing. But you have touched people today, and to hear the wisdom and direction and clarity that comes out of your mouth because of your experiences, it can't happen, unfortunately, without the experiences that you have had. And I know our listeners are appreciative. I don't know how you can contextualize all that in your experiences, but it sure has been for the benefit of the kingdom. I can tell you that. And we are so grateful that you spent time with us today to share some of your insight and your wisdom with our listeners. It has just been a delight.
Well, I'm always so honored. And just pray that every person that hears this will put down those fighting hands or that willful spirit and say, you know what, Lord, I have fought long enough. I've tried to do this on my own long enough. When you try to screw in a screw so many times, you can strip it. Maybe put that down and just say, Lord, you're the only one that can do this. So I'm going to fall at the cross and trust you to carry me through. That's what we do.
That's it.
All right, guys. Well, I'm your host, Dan Riveros, with my co-host,
David Henriksen.
And we want to thank you all for joining us today on Walking Through Samaria. Thank you again to our wonderful guest, Colleen. We're in your debt. We loved having you.
Hey, I love being with you guys. You're doing great. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. That's it for today on the Walking Through Samaria podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time. See you later, Dan.
See ya. For more content like this, visit us at givingcompany.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Walking Through Samaria.